What's up, everyone? Tara Roberts here with Bleacher Report. I hope that everything treated you very well this week. We're going to go ahead and dive right in because we have a ton to talk about here. We've got a fun topic here. We are talking players that can save your fantasy season if you trade for them. So drop your trade questions in the chat here. And let's go through the list. Let's go ahead and dive right in because this is the last chance for a lot of you guys. I know the trade deadline is coming up for a lot of you here. It's coming up in my leagues too. We want to go ahead and lock those in, grab those players that are going to help us for this stretch run here and in the fantasy playoffs and get us to the fantasy playoffs. We got to get there first, right, people? All right, let's go ahead and dive right in here with the first player. And again, drop your trade questions in the chat. First player here that we are trading for, it is Stefon Diggs. Not everything has to be a buy low option here. Stefon Diggs is coming off of a good game here, and he's had an incredibly underrated season here. It's gone underrated because he did get off to a slow start, right? It was not fantastic to begin with, scoring between just 5 and 11 fantasy points in the first 3 games of the season, and what should have been really easy matchups where, in theory, the wide receiver should have gone off there. It was Vegas, Miami, Pittsburgh. But again, we got to remember, he was coming off a significant injury. He is 31 years old. It takes a little time for you to ramp up once you get past a certain point there. And ramp up, he did. He has looked fantastic after getting off to that slower start there. And they've really pushed more volume to him. Earlier in the season, you could tell that they were trying to be a little bit more intentional about not giving Stefon Diggs an aggressive load, because that was earlier in the season when we had the heavy usage of Hunter Henry. They were targeting the tight ends at such an aggressive rate. Hunter Henry has extremely, essentially disappeared from the offense, right? He has scored single-digit fantasy points for a very long time here, and Stefon Diggs is thriving here. Over the past, excluding those first 3 games there, he has been wide receiver 15 in PPR, averaging nearly 15 fantasy points per game. He's been thriving. He's a strong wide receiver too here. The touchdowns have finally come through with Kayshon Boutte out. And if you're worried about Kayshon Boutte being out there and that being the thing that has really, pushed him and elevated him here, it's less about Kayshon Boutte's absence, and that has helped because Kayshon Boutte was a touchdown magnet. But it's more about the fact that we are seeing a little increased volume from Drake May there. And in particular, it's really being focused in on the receiving core. So now we go from there being like one viable option with a little bit of upside to multiple guys going off, right? We've had Mac Hollins having good games as well here. So additional involvement there from Kyle Williams. So we're feeling pretty good about the direction that Stefon Diggs is heading. And the reason that we really want to grab him here is because they have a fantastic rest of season schedule. Quite frankly, New England has potentially one of the easiest rest of season schedules remaining here. They face Cincinnati. After that, they face the Giants. They have a bye week. So again, keep this in mind as you are buying him, that he does still have a bye week left here. So you do want to, factor that in and make sure you're okay for that week. But then after that, you get Buffalo. That should encourage high volume there. We've seen them, torn apart by teams like Miami, right? Then Baltimore, another high volume matchup there. And then a championship game against the New York Jets. It's not the same defense. They traded everybody away. And that's the team that, Stefon Diggs just had over 100 yards on. So we feel pretty good about him here. Let's go on to the next player here. The next player here is Breece Hall. Breece Hall, we are trading. This is a true buy low here, because he is unfortunately coming off one of his, it wasn't dreadful, but it was one of his, subpar games here in terms of games that he's had this season here. But overall, this season has been very underrated for him, flying under the radar a little bit. It's been a very impressive season from him, because for him to be able to get any production on the ground when the team has literally not had a lick of a passing game here has been highly impressive. To have any success on the ground when your quarterback legitimately struggles to throw the ball over 50 yards is highly impressive there. And then when we look at why he is a buy low now, we also want to get in there and get him before they make this quarterback change, right? They announced that they are unfortunately benching Justin Fields. Now, you know how it goes with Tyrod Taylor. Quite frankly, we could have Justin Fields anyway, because unfortunately, Tyrod often doesn't make it too long before an injury occurs there. But Tyrod Taylor does bring a little bit of promise to this offense in terms of at least being able to get to, like, I don't know, maybe 200 passing yards. He can do that for us, and it can open things up a little bit for Breece, who has just really been having to carry the load here. We love Breece because he is the RB1. He is the soul back there. We saw in that one good matchup against Cincinnati the increased usage of Isaiah Davis there. But outside of that matchup here, it's just been the Breece Hall show on the ground, and with good reason. He's been in excellent form here. Now, again, when we look at why we want to target him, the Jets also have an extremely good strength of schedule rest away across all positions here. They only have one truly difficult matchup. That is against New England in championship week. Keep that in mind. But at least we do have the promise of potentially having Tyrod in that matchup to make things a little bit better. That's the matchup that we just saw here. New England is tough against the run. You know, Breece had 8 fantasy points against them. But again, heading into this week, he was averaging RB 16 on the year in PP in half PPR, RB 16 on the year in half PPR. Half of his games have been top 20 performances, so we feel really, really good about him and his potential in these good matchups coming up here, especially with Tyrod Taylor on the cusp. So if you want to invest, do it now before the quarterback change, before he gets onto the field and actually has a little bit more success with Tyrod at the helm there. Now, looking onto our next player here that we are going to buy, we are going to do another buy low here on Emeka Egbuka here. And this is a really good buy low opportunity because it's tough to say to buy low on a guy who literally popped onto the scene in an absolutely insane, like Jamar Chase-ish way in terms of a rookie, right? Really dominating, sitting there and outperforming even a guy like Mike Evans there immediately in this season here. So to say there's a buy low opportunity feels crazy, but there really is here because we have the looming return here of Chris Godwin and the potential return here of Mike Evans in the fantasy playoffs. His year is not necessarily over, people. We could get him back in the fantasy playoffs there. So when you look at that coming off of that game, a little bit of inconsistency there for a while with Baker Mayfield going through some struggles and the potential return there of other receivers. Fantasy managers might be looking for a nice little clean exit for him, but I don't think you need to bail out on him. We can buy cheap on him because we know that he produced alongside Mike Evans earlier in the season. So another wide receiver being there is not a massive threat to his game. I mean, he was thriving in terms of touchdowns on the field with Mike Evans there. When we talk about Chris Godwin, obviously the overlap, unfortunately, is only a couple games for Chris Godwin there, but Emeka Egbuka did outperform Chris Godwin in both of those matchups. And we have to remember he will be coming off of another long injury break here. So we might be expecting some underperformances from him as well. But looking at this week 11 game here, 5 receptions on 9 targets. He's still the wide receiver 1 there. It was just a little bit underwhelming there in what we felt like should have been a little bit of a better matchup here, especially after he had gotten back on track there in week 10 against New England, where he had 6 receptions on 13 targets, 115 yards and a touchdown. He has been a little bit streakier than we would like, but I think that streakiness is not entirely his fault. A lot of that streakiness that he had kind of in the midseason there where he was underperforming, that was less about him, although he was dealing with a hamstring injury, and more about Baker Mayfield. Mayfield had been struggling, got a little rattled by that matchup with Detroit there and struggled significantly just to get the ball out in general. And Emeka Egbuka was the one that really suffered for it there. But rest of season schedule is good for him. Rams next week is not a good matchup, right? But after that, we get Arizona, New Orleans, Atlanta, Carolina, Miami in championship week. Things are looking in a positive direction for Egbuka, and you can grab him on the cheap now after the bad performance, and plus because of the scarce nature of the return of Chris Godwin and potentially coming back here as he's being trotted out on the field with Bucky Irving. We'll see if he actually plays this week. We'll see. The original timeline they gave us was late November, early December there. But moving on to our next player here, we're going to talk about buying in on Deebo Samuel. And I want you to hear me out on this one because I know that nobody wants to buy in on Deebo, but that's the point. Nobody wants to buy on Deebo. And sometimes when nobody wants to buy in and everybody's looking to sell, you zig where you zag, right? I think we talked, I'm not sure if we talked about it on this show, but one of my favorite trade candidates a couple of weeks ago was buying in, I think we did actually talk about it, buying in on Jameson Williams. And the reason for that is, again, sometimes you have to make counteractive moves when everybody else is looking at it from a different direction. So while everyone was buying Jameson, or was selling Jameson. We were buying Jameson, and now it is paying off in dividends. That's the same concept here with Deebo Samuel. It's a value trade. Deebo is priced around guys who are not actually wide receiver one on their team or even the first look on their team. It's guys like Keenan Allen, Xavier Worthy, Jawan Jennings. He is priced below even guys like Rashid Shaheed, Jordan Addison, and well priced below guys like Quentin Johnston, Wandell Robinson, Alec Pierce, Romeo Dobbs. Logically, that doesn't make a ton of sense. It's because his value is depreciated because people are a little bit skeptical. They came into the season a little bit skeptical there. But Deebo Samuel has been the wide receiver one on his team for the entire season. That is inclusive when Terry McLaurin was playing there. You got to go back and remember, we were frustrated with Terry McLaurin. We weren't frustrated with Deebo. Deebo has 68 targets on the season. The next closest player in the Washington Commanders receiving corps there was Jalen Lane at 30 targets. Yeah, he's been operating as the clear first look there. It's just about a little bit of inconsistency at quarterback here. He's got touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. And when you break down the season and look at the time period that he struggled, you could argue that the issue there was that he was trying to play through an injury. Remember, he got that heel injury, was trying to play through it there, and he had some underwhelming performances here, but he looks like himself now, a little bit more explosive here. Clearly came into the week healthy. Great matchup against Miami, obviously, but it was good to see the healthier version of him. Commanders are obviously on a bye week here, so we're looking at rest of season here to really pick things up afterwards. Afterwards, we've got a matchup with Denver, but then things really lighten up, and that's the key there. He gets Minnesota, followed by the Giants. He's got a championship matchup against Dallas. And remember, he outperformed Terry McLaurin all season. That was not an issue, so you don't need to really worry about that. Moving on to our next player here. And then remember, guys, drop your questions for trades in the chat. Gathering them all up here as we're talking, and I'm going to get to to as many of them as I can here so we can talk through it. So drop your trade packages in chat so I can get to it after I wrap up these next few players here. Jalen Waddle is the next player that we are going to buy in on here. And I don't know how much convincing it's going to take here with Jalen Waddle, you guys. It's Jalen Waddle. Come on here. He is coming off his worst performance. So it's a buy low. He's coming off his worst performance since becoming the Dolphins' de facto wide receiver one after the Tyreek Hill injury. Outside of that nightmare game against Cleveland, we don't count that one. It was wind so bad that neither quarterback could throw 3 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, so that one doesn't count here. But this week here was definitely a letdown here. 3 receptions, 7 targets, 52 yards here. It's the perfect time to buy low. Waddle essentially has a permanent discount tag on him anyway because he is attached to Tua Tagovailoa and Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins' entire organization, quite frankly, there. But we need to take a step back here and remember the player that Jalen Waddle is here. This is a guy who was tracking as a rookie to be one of the premier wide receivers in the league. As a rookie, had over 100 receptions and 1,000 yards with Tua here. He is the clear wide receiver one, and he is very capable of taking advantage of the matchups that are coming up here in the back half of the season here. Remember, we shouldn't be super surprised that the Dolphins are kind of turning things around here because they had a rough first half of the season in terms of a schedule here. Back half of the season has been more of a layup. We've got matchups coming up against New Orleans, the New York Jets, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Tampa Bay. Every single one of those is matchups that you love. Again, when you look at New Orleans, just underwhelming in general. The New York Jets defense has just been a complete disaster since they traded away so many core players there. Pittsburgh has been pass friendly all season long. Cincinnati has been pass friendly all season long. And Tampa Bay is a team that obviously is very pass encouraging there. And again, I think I've mentioned this before because we've talked about Miami prior. I think when we were talking about Malik Washington as a super buy low there, low end target. What we look forward to is the fantasy playoffs where Miami is playing at home in weeks 16 and 17 there. So finally, we don't have to get Tua on those cold weather, Buffalo, Kansas City, trying to deal with snow and failing miserably. No, he's in Miami. He will be perfectly fine. He will not have to deal with the big snow and cold and weather issues. He doesn't like it. Neither do I. So I totally get it there. But moving on here to our next player. And again, remember, buy low on Jalen Waddle here. Great opportunity. But moving on to our next player here, our last player that we're going to buy low on. And then I'm going to talk to you guys and answer your chats and trade questions here. Michael Pittman coming off the bye week. He is the perfect buy low here. You notice a trend with these guys that we're buying low here. It's perception that they have here. And Michael Pittman doesn't have a bad team perception anymore. It's always that's something that he has battled in the past here, a bad team perception here, but the Colts are thriving here. But the perception that he has to deal with now is the perception that Alec Pierce is taking over as the wide receiver one. And don't get me wrong, Alec Pierce is fantastic. If he's out there on waivers, go and grab him. And he's also a good little trade target too as well, because he's really pushed ahead of Josh Downs and has become, the permanent deep threat in this offense here. But when we're looking at Michael Pittman, he is a true wide receiver one, people. You can't ask for a cheaper buy for a guy who has literally performed in terms of average points per game in half PPR and PPR as a wide receiver one here. Prior to this week, obviously, we had him on the bye week, but prior to this week, he was wide receiver 11 on the season here in PPR. And prior to that down week matchup where Alec Pierce went off, he had 3 straight top 15 performances here. One bad week where the matchup didn't favor him. Don't let that fool you in terms of the upside that Pittman has to offer here. And he is well underpriced for where he should be at. He is an excellent buy low for a guy. If you are looking for a true wide receiver one that you can count on, who has been thriving through touchdowns, ironically, something that has plagued him and he has struggled with entirely throughout his career. Finally, everything is clicking in this offense with the right quarterback for him that can actually target him in the red zone and get those touchdowns to him. He is thriving here. So we love Michael Pittman as well. But jumping to the chat here, guys, I am ready to answer some questions here. And I'm going to go and talk about chat from Forrest here. How do I trade away Justin Jefferson? Which I totally get, because I had my hopes that we would be able to have Justin Jefferson as a buy low candidate here, that we would perhaps get some kind of turnaround here from JJ McCarthy. And unfortunately, he's just really struggling here. He's still, if you want to sell him, and I get it, and I don't hate buying him, but if you want to get out of this, because it has been very, very frustrating, the inconsistencies and the targeting issues that we're showing this week, it's not a bad thing to get out of, because quite frankly, he is priced very similarly to a guy like Jalen Waddle, a guy like Rome Odunze, who does have his up and downs as well. A guy like Nico Collins would be a really interesting one. Maybe target a Nico Collins as well, because Nico Collins is somebody else who obviously is in an offense that is a little inconsistent, but he at least has the benefit as the wide receiver one of getting targets consistently pumped to him. So maybe that's a good one to target there. Seeing if you can get Justin Jefferson flipped for a Nico Collins there. Moving on to a chat from your dad. London and Benson for Judkins and Ibuka. I would be giving away Ibuka and Judkins. I don't mind that at all. Then we do have London that is dealing with the injury, so we might need to, figure out. Unfortunately, I want to say we did get an update that his is potentially a multi-week injury. I would search it up now, but I don't want to freeze up my computer here. But we know that Penix is going on IR, so that does make us a little bit concerned, although he has performed well with obviously Kirk Cousins last year, was throwing for volume. The offense struggled as a whole, right? But in terms of getting the ball to London, he was able to do that very well there. But just double check and just make sure that you are prepared to potentially be if this is something that you're willing to be without for a couple of weeks here and then head high into the fantasy playoffs, sure. But if you need him to win now, be very careful about that one because of the injury situation and because, Atlanta is not in an ideal position here. Chat from Jake. Keep or trade away Waddle. Keep there. I just don't think that the trade away value for him, you're losing on that one. Quite frankly, he is a really, really excellent piece. I would hold here. We talked about that playoff schedule that he has, one of the best playoff schedules that you can ask for, quite frankly. So keep on him, because that is, if I hate to say league winning upside, but if I got to say league winning upside in the fantasy playoffs, I could see him going off in every single matchup in the fantasy playoffs there. From Toasted, best asking price for Diggs / Swift there. So Diggs is an interesting one because again, I think he's very reasonably priced. If I were to compare wide receivers, maybe again like if you're trying to acquire him, maybe you could trade away players like Zay Flowers, a DK Metcalf who has been inconsistent. Perhaps a Cortland Sutton is kind of around the same area there. Um, maybe a Chris Olave, although to his credit, Chris Olave has been good with Tyler Shuck. We will need to see how good Tyler Shuck is now that they're out of the bye week here. But potentially that's kind of the area that you would look at. Now, DeAndre Swift is an interesting one because when I look at Swift, I value him fairly high because again, the Chicago has been run heavy. We've had inconsistencies through the past from Caleb Williams. He can go off, but really the ground game as a whole has been thriving, and there is that threat that we have of Kyle Monangai, and I love Kyle Monangai, so I mean that is no insult there. But at best, it's a committee that leans towards Swift. Swift came back from his injury and he did, gain back that clear job there. I don't think it's in Mecca, or I don't think it's a Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle type of situation there. But Swift's area is kind of like around that Amarian Hampton, RJ Harvey, Aaron Jones kind of area there in terms of his trade value. From Henry on YouTube, should I trade Justin Jefferson for Diggs or JMO? I'm okay with that one. I think you should force the whoever the fantasy manager is to add a little bit in there because I do think it warrants. Would I rather start Jameson Williams over Justin Jefferson at this point with Sam Laporta out? Yeah, on a week-to-week basis, I would probably feel a little bit more comfortable with Jameson at this point. And Diggs, rest of season as well. But I will say that's super lopsided. So if you're trading away Justin Jefferson, I would want a little bit more back in terms of an additional piece in that one because Justin Jefferson's value, despite the fact that obviously he is going through a lot of struggles there, it's still extremely high because he has that name brand value. So he's still up there with your Devontae Adams type of receivers, right? Um, from Noah, who should I start week 12? DK Metcalf or Jordan Addison there? So both of those guys have been very frustrating, right? I lean towards going with DK Metcalf on that one because at the very least, it is, unfortunately, it does look like we're going to be without Aaron Rodgers on that one. But I lean towards DK Metcalf because he does have the better matchup. He has been at least, the most reliable option in the receiving core. Unfortunately, they are leaning aggressively on the ground game because they are successful on the ground there. So we do have to keep that in mind. But it is a good matchup there against Chicago. So I do lean towards DK because at least he is operating as the wide receiver one there. From Ravens, should I trade Drake London? And for who? Yeah, I don't think this is a bad time to trade Drake London. Again, we were talking about the other chat previously who was looking to acquire Drake London. And to me, I agree with you that this is a good chance to maybe pivot away from Drake London, which I hate to say because he's Drake London and he's been operating at such a high level. The problem is that the injury concern here, the fact that the Falcons, I don't know that they're truly going anywhere. Now they have to start Kirk Cousins. That also hurts them in terms of going somewhere. And it does seem like we're, unfortunately, they said with Michael Penix, there's potential for, surgery that's needed on the ACL there. So realistically, we're looking at Kirk Cousins' rest of season here. And the little sample size we've had has been it's been a sample size, right? So yes, trade away Drake London would be good here. Quite frankly, you could look to now you realize that you're down. So if I say Jalen Waddle, realize that you're downgrading in value there. So if you're trading away Drake London, you might want to add on a little piece, perhaps get somebody to throw in a high-end handcuff as well to kind of, piece that together and make the value a little bit more fair there. But yeah, trading down to, again, Jalen Waddle and Nico Collins is a really interesting one. I talked about him earlier, somebody who is consistently valued below that, upper, we'll say like the mid-tier Rashee Rice, kind of Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown range. but really has, continued to be a solid option despite the fact that he has dealt with, shaky quarterback situations, shaky offensive line, right? But he is still the de facto wide receiver one there, and he's healthy, and he should be getting CJ Stroud back here, hopefully in the next week. So yeah, that's another good option as well that you could trade for. Um, then we have Carl asking, I have Saquon. Who could I trade for? So with Saquon Barkley, he still holds a relatively high value here. I say that you could probably flip him for a Kyron Williams and feel more comfortable. I wouldn't mind pivoting to a Rico Dowdle over him as well. Rico, obviously, a clear RB1, a guy that has thrived on the ground as well. We see the Panthers offense looking definitely more competent in this past matchup here. And also the Panthers have a very reasonable strength of schedule as well moving forward. So we feel a little bit more comfortable with him. I think there's one bad matchup in week 13 against the LA Rams. That's not good, but we have seen Rico do good in bad matchups. So it's not a major issue. That's one that you could look at. Perhaps an Ashton Genty would be one. And you might be able to convince somebody to flip a James Cook for him. That might be in line. And this might also not be, if you're willing to take the risk, this might not be a bad opportunity to maybe flip for Josh Jacobs. Jacobs is dealing with an knee injury, but they did say there is no structural knee damage. So we're not expecting a major issue. So if you could perhaps afford to be without Josh Jacobs this week, that actually might be a very interesting option to flip for. If you can manage to be without him this week and definitely upgrade to Josh Jacobs there, who's definitely been more consistent, reliable in terms of touchdowns. From John, should I trade Bijan? I have Hampton on IR, Singletary as my next best option. I feel like I could sell high here. I want you to keep Bijan there. Hampton could be coming. The problem is that we still don't know exactly on Hampton. And I have my concerns, unfortunately, about the Chargers offense moving forward because the past couple of matchups that we got, this one against Jacksonville and then previously against Pittsburgh, I don't think those were anomalies. Those were the first two games since we got that Joe Alt injury. And they tried to hold the Chargers offensive line, tried to hold things together very well. When Alt was out earlier in the season, they lost Rashawn Slater earlier in the season as well. So they've been piecing it together and they've been trying. But I think it finally gave in. And maybe the bye week, maybe they can retool over the bye week and figure out how to make it work. But man, that line showcased very bad, unfortunately, in this matchup with Jacksonville and really last week as well with Pittsburgh. So I've got my concerns that Hampton might not offer a ton of, might essentially have that same consistency that Vidal has once he does come off IR. And again, similarly to a lot of these other running backs that are dealing with injuries, we don't have an exact timeline, right? In terms of his return there. Hopefully after the Bible, we don't know for sure there. And then Singletary looked fantastic this week. He's the clear goal line back, but do remember that when Jackson Dart comes back, those two touchdown opportunities at the goal line that Singletary got, Jackson Dart probably going to steal those, unfortunately. Jameis Winston did get a touchdown on the ground to his credit, but really some of that Jackson Dart really takes away a lot of those opportunities. Unfortunately, he calls his own number at the goal line there. So it's just very risky there. So I think you need to keep Bijan. Again, you can get a hefty penny for him because now after this performance, he is definitely valued just right below Jonathan Taylor, maybe right around Jahmyr Gibbs and Christian McCaffrey, right? Maybe a little bit higher just because his upside is so massive there. But again, you need to keep that piece there because you don't want to be left too destitute, even if you're getting back, very adequate pieces there. From JJ, Marvin Harrison Jr. for Emeka Ibuka. I don't hate that. I think that's fine. That's fine. I do have high hopes for Marvin Harrison Jr. once he does return, just because Jacoby Brissett has been dealing. Volume will be no issue for him. It's just a matter of him catching the ball and not dropping. He's had a ridiculous amount of drops this season. But making that trade for Emeka Ibuka does make sense. You get somebody that you can utilize right now. Marvin Harrison Jr. could be back this week, could not. It's not a long-term injury, but we ultimately don't know the true timeline on that one. So I don't mind that. From BN, I have Achan, Bijan, Henderson, Quentin Johnston, Rome Odunze, BTJ, all letdowns. Who should I trade? this might be a good time for you to capitalize. So I mean, you've got Achan. You're so better days ahead here. You've got Achan, who has been incredibly consistent. Bijan back on track here, and with Kirk Cousins at quarterback, this actually might be a better situation for him, quite frankly. And then obviously Travion Henderson off of the big game here. Although we do, we worry about when Ramondre comes back. Quentin Johnston, your wide receivers are very disappointing there. I would probably try to capitalize and trade Henderson and see who you can get for Henderson. I think when we're looking at Henderson's value here, you could probably get you might be able to get a T. Higgins. That might be a good one. And then remember, if you trade for a T. Higgins, you probably get in a suspension game where Jamar Chase, little spitting issue there. T. Higgins will operate as the wide receiver one. We got Joe Burrow coming back. So all good things on the horizon there. Maybe trade Henderson and target a T. Higgins level of player there would be good for you. From Hope. AJ Brown for Ibuka. Yes, I would do that. Look, they have the AJ Brown. This game right here was the squeaky wheel game, right? You got AJ Brown complaining in the media. You shift the volume to him to make him happy right there. That does not mean that is going to consistently be going to him like that on a regular basis here. Trading out of that to an Emeka Ibuka, who again has high touchdown equity. We've seen him succeed across being on the field with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin there. So I feel good about that one for you. And then one more question here, and we'll wrap things up here from Bear Force. Keep or trade Vidal. If you can get something out of Kamani Vidal, I would trade him here. Again, we talked about the Chargers offensive line situation. It's going to create continued inconsistency opportunities on the ground there for the run game. So there will be times where he can overcome that offensive line and you get into a high situation, a ceiling situation, but then there will be those low 3-4 fantasy point games, unfortunately, there. So yeah, and we've got the bye week here. So trade Kamani Vidal if you've got somebody who loves him and wants to stash him for a playoff run that may not actually happen, right? In terms of Kamani Vidal having that upside there. But that wraps things up, guys. I appreciate you all tuning in. Just a little recap here of the players that we did talk about. Again, when we were looking at the trade targets here, we had a wonderful little group of trade targets in Stephon Diggs, who has been operating at a higher level now that he's integrated back into the offense and, far removed from that ACL injury. We have Breece Hall, the good buy low opportunity coming on this game, coming off of this, down game against New England. Bad matchup there. Better days, hopefully on ahead with the switch at quarterback to Tyrod Taylor, push a little more pass volume, open things up a little bit there for Breece Hall to get more potential check down opportunities that, Justin Fields was a little lacking on, unfortunately, recently. And then upside touchdown opportunities as well. Emeka Ibuka, we talked about also in the trade opportunities, a good trade target there in terms of the upside that he showcased throughout the season. Deebo Samuel, a de facto wide receiver one that has been performing as a wide receiver one and has a hefty discount on his value right now. Jalen Waddle as well, same situation in terms of somebody who was the wide receiver one. Reasonable value here and a really excellent trade target because of the playoff schedule literally being chef's kiss. Perfect for Miami there. And then Michael Pittman coming off the bye week here, coming off the down week in the prior week in week 10 where Alec Pierce had the big game. Outside of that game there, Michael Pittman has outperformed him in general throughout the entire season there. He has such high upside. He is the much higher lock for touchdown opportunities there, really thriving on the season, having a career season here. Really good buy low trade target there. But that wraps things up. I appreciate you all for tuning in. Again, make sure you got your alerts on because, again, we have so many injuries going on here. You're going to want to get those updates and alerts in terms of the timelines for all of these players that are dealing with injuries here. And again, I will be here with you every week for the remainder of the fantasy season, helping you win your league. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Terra Time. So enjoy the Monday night game. Have a fantastic week. Hope you wrap up those matchups really good this week and head into next week feeling good. I will talk to you all again next Monday.